There are encounters that seem harmless, yet they awaken things both people have tried to bury. When the narcissist sees you after the discard, they always appear calm, cold, as if they are the only one holding power in that invisible room. But behind that still, expressionless mask is a tiny whirlwind, one that, if you're perceptive, you'll notice is quietly moving. Because the truth is, they never come with an empty heart. They come with a list of unspoken hopes they have never dared to admit even to themselves. They hope your eyes are still a little wet, as if the breakup still haunts you every night. They want to see the slightest tremble in the way you stand, as if their presence still affects the rhythm of your breathing. They want each word you say, each smile, or even a brief flicker of confusion in your gaze to confirm that they still exist somewhere inside your inner world. For them, this encounter is not mere coincidence. It is a test to see how much power they still hold over your soul. And it is in that moment that something interesting happens. Their eyes linger 1 second longer than necessary. On the surface they seem indifferent, but deep in the unconscious they are assessing how healed your heart is, how much your memory has left behind, and whether you still reflect the image they once constructed inside you. Jung said that the shadow does not fear truth, it only fears being forgotten. And when they look at you, what they truly want to know is, do you still remember me in a way that makes me feel significant? Yet this encounter does not expose only them, it exposes you as well, but not in the way they expect. Because if you have grown, if your heart no longer searches for answers from someone who never intended to heal you, then seeing them again feels like looking into an old room where you were once imprisoned. You realize you have already stepped out of it, and you no longer flinch when you see the place where you once fell. This unsettles them, because they never expected to meet a reborn version of you. They expected to meet the old victim, and this is where the power shifts. When you understand the 10 things they secretly hope will happen when they see you after the discard, you begin to see the truth clearly. They do not come back to control you. They come back to soothe their own inner fear. The fear that you have stepped out of their shadow, taking with you the role they needed in order to feel they existed. That encounter, therefore, is not their test for you. It is a mirror reflecting the loss of control they are desperately trying to hide. 1. They hope you are still drowning in pain. The first thing a narcissist hopes for when they see you after the discard is this, that you are still hurting because of them. But the pain they look for is not the obvious kind, tears or a trembling voice. They want to see a deeper, quieter kind of pain, something subtle but real, just enough to let them know they still occupy a place in your psychological world. To them, your pain is not just an emotion, it is proof that they still hold a position inside your mental system. When they walked away, they believed they left behind a void no one else could fill. This is not mere arrogance, it is an ego illusion, reinforced by a mechanism many psychologists describe as self-enhancement bias. Research by Campbell and Foster, 2007, Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, shows that people with narcissistic tendencies overestimate their impact on others' emotions and view the suffering of the other person as validation of their own worth. So when they see you again, they don't look for signs on the surface. They scan for microsignals, the way your eyes linger a moment too long, the slight shift in your breathing, or the soft drop of your voice when the past is mentioned. To them, any subtle change is an answer. You haven't completely escaped them. What they fear is not your pain. What they fear is the absence of your pain. A person who is still hurting is a person still unconsciously connected, but a person who is calm is someone who has detached, not just emotionally, but existentially. According to Jung, when an image that once held psychic dominance is withdrawn, the ego structure attached to that image begins to shake. And to the narcissist, your serenity is the signal that they no longer see themselves reflected in you, meaning their shadow has lost its anchor. They hope you are still hurting, because as long as you hurt, the story they tell themselves remains intact, that they are a chapter you cannot fully close, that they are a memory you cannot put down. When they look at you, They are checking whether the breakup shaped you in the ways they imagined. Sleepless nights, overthinking, or doubting your worth. Because if you are still struggling, then their role has not been erased. But their deepest, most strategic hope is this: pain keeps the door open. Someone who is still hurting is someone who might return to what is familiar, even if that familiar thing is the source of the pain. The narcissist knows this instinctively. Pain makes you reinterpret the past in ways that benefit them, blame yourself more easily, and give them chances they do not deserve. Pain maintains their psychological leverage. What they never understand and never prepare for is the subtlety of healing. You may still feel a heaviness when you see them, but that does not mean dependence. You may still touch old memories, but not to cling to them, only to close them. Some pain is no longer a chain. It becomes proof that you walked through darkness alone and survived. When you can stand before them and your heart no longer trembles the way it once did, that is not cruelty. It is the sign of a psyche that has reorganized itself after collapse. And that is what shakes their inner world the most. Not because you are strong, but because in their eyes you no longer resemble someone they can shape. You are no longer fertile ground for their shadow to root itself in. 2. They hope you will be confused when you see them, even for just a second. They want to catch a momentary pause in you, as if old memories suddenly rise to the surface and pull you back into an emotional territory you thought you had already left behind. Because that instant of confusion, even if no one sees it but them, is where they read their hope. You still haven't escaped my influence. The image they carry in their mind as they walk toward you is a silent psychological test. When your eyes meet theirs, they observe in micro detail the tension in your eyelids, the slight tremble at the corner of your lips, the shift in your tone when you greet them. What an ordinary person wouldn't notice, they analyze, like an archaeologist searching for remnants of emotional ruins. According to Jung, the shadow of someone who once touched your psyche will always try to find its way back by probing the parts of you you haven't illuminated yet. Confusion is one of those dark spots, the place where old reactions, old memories, and unresolved emotions can suddenly activate. And the narcissist uses that as their tool to measure whether they still have power. What they want to see is not love nor hatred, but disruption within you. Because that disruption tells them their presence still interferes, still influences, still registers somewhere in your emotional nervous system. A person who can confuse you is a person who still exists somewhere on the map of your inner world. They hope you will feel a bit unnatural when meeting their gaze, as if your body remembers them before your mind catches up. They hope you'll have to readjust your emotional stance after standing in front of them, because that gives them the illusion that they are not a closed chapter, but an emotional trigger that still has pull. What they want to see is not obvious discomfort. Even a micro-reaction is enough for them to breathe easier. Paul Ekman's research on micro-expressions shows that suppressed emotions leak out in 1/10 of a second, and narcissists are extremely attuned to these signals. One fleeting moment and they will interpret it as, it's still there, I'm still in you. But what they never expect is this: true calm produces no micro-reactions. It produces emotional emptiness towards someone who once controlled you. And to them, that emptiness is not indifference, it is finality. Not because you are cold, but because you now see through the mask you once believed was their real self. 3. They hope you still feel guilty. When a narcissist sees you again after the discard, one of their deepest hidden wishes is to find traces of guilt in your eyes. That same emotion they once used as a soft leash, requiring no raised voice, no threats, yet strong enough to keep you orbiting them. To them, guilt is the most sophisticated form of power. It makes you want to explain, to fix, to prove, to do better. What they hope for is not an apology, but that you still feel you owe them something, a vague sense of responsibility, unclear where you went wrong, yet still feeling you need to correct something. Guilt makes you spiral into self-evaluation while they maintain the role of observer and judge. When they meet you, they pay close attention to the way you over-explain a simple statement, how you try to respond perfectly, how you subtly adjust your tone to avoid upsetting them. To them, these are not signs of politeness, they are signals of residual submission. A person who still feels guilty is a person who is still easy to control. According to Carl Jung, guilt is not merely an emotion, it is an unconscious binding mechanism where the psyche tries to repair something that was never its responsibility. Narcissists exploit exactly this point. They let you believe the breakup happened because you weren't enough, you were too sensitive, you didn't understand them, you reacted wrong. When they see you again, they want to know whether those old questions still echo inside you. Guilt turns you toward them when you should be turning back toward yourself. They hope your eyes will drop slightly, as if you're still wondering whether you might have hurt them. They hope you speak with caution, as if you're afraid to repeat old mistakes. They hope your posture shrinks just a little, as if you're still carrying the emotional burden they placed on you. Because if you still feel guilty, you will still try. And if you still try, they still have a place to come back into. The image they want to see in you is not the heartbroken ex, but the person who used to take blame. In their mind, as long as you feel inadequate, they remain above. Research by June Tangney, an expert on guilt and shame at George Mason University, shows that guilt makes people more easily controlled because they continuously look for ways to repair something, even when they did nothing wrong. Narcissists grasp this instinctively, which is why guilt matters more to them than your pain or confusion. But what they never prepare for is the day you realize the guilt was never yours. The day you stand before them with nothing to explain, nothing to fix, nothing to shrink for. The day you understand that their wrongdoing does not mean you must pay the price. Guilt disappears, not through resistance, but through awareness. And when they see in you a calmness that carries no compensation, no burden, no self-blame, they don't just lose the last rope that once tied you. They lose their role as the director of the story they thought they were writing. 4. They want to see you feel beneath them, even just a little. Not because they need your admiration, but because watching you shrink, even subtly, helps them maintain the illusion that the old power dynamic hasn't been broken. In their psychology, power isn't something created, it's the imbalance inside another person. They survive through that gap, and their eyes scan over you, they silently measure many things. Whether your posture is steady, whether your voice is confident, whether your gaze is calm, or still carries a hint of hesitation. If they detect the slightest withdrawal in you, a moment of uncertainty, a trace of self-diminishing, to them that is a confirmation, I'm still above you. They want to believe their life is moving forward faster than yours, that they are stepping into a brighter phase while you're still stumbling. They want you to look at them and quietly wonder, am I falling behind? That moment of comparison, the one you think no one notices, is exactly what they observe most clearly. Because for a narcissist, they do not need you to admire them. They only need you to lack the confidence to stand as their equal. In psychoanalysis, Jung noted that when the shadow goes unrecognized, it tries to pull others downward to feel taller. The narcissist operates exactly through that mechanism. They don't want to climb. They want you to step down. And if you emit even a slight energy of inferiority when encountering them, it reassures them that they still control the narrative. They won't say it, but you can feel what they hope for. That you will look at them and unconsciously tense your shoulders. That you will smile awkwardly, as if trying to make a good impression. That you will try to prove you're doing fine while they stand there, analyzing your smallest effort like an audience waiting for the next act. They want you to believe they are doing better, so you convince yourself you are not enough. There is nothing noble in them, only the need to stay on top, to avoid facing their deepest fear. If you are not below me, I won't know who I am. What they hope for has nothing to do with your actual success or failure. It has everything to do with how you perceive yourself when standing next to them. Because if you stand tall, if your gaze stays steady, if your heart no longer contracts the way it once did, they feel the entire ego structure they built through comparison collapsing. True calm in you can shock them more than any grand success you achieve. The cruel truth they are never prepared to face is this: you don't need to be above them to take away their power. You just need to stop feeling beneath them. The moment you stand before them without falling into the old unconscious comparison, the scale between you shifts. They are no longer the measure by which you evaluate yourself. They disappear from the internal system you once used to define your worth. And when they lose the role of benchmark, they lose the special position they thought they owned inside your soul. For you, it is growth. For them, it is collapse. 5. They hope you are still afraid of losing them. What a narcissist secretly hopes for when they see you after the discard is not love, not anger, not even sadness, but one small crucial feeling: the fear of losing them completely. They want to see a vague worry in your eyes, as if you're standing on the edge of something irreversible, something you can't get back unless you're careful. To them, that fear is not an emotion. It is psychological currency. A person who still fears losing someone is a person who has not truly left. When they see you again, they watch every tiny movement to find traces of lingering insecurity. The slight tension in your shoulders when you notice them, the way you adjust your gaze, avoiding eye contact for too long, the careful choice of words, as if one wrong sentence could close the last door between you. They want to see something subtle, that you still don't fully believe you can thrive if they disappear forever. Jung once said, a person becomes truly free when they no longer fear losing what was never theirs to begin with. The narcissist understands this instinctively. That's why they build relationships with ambiguity, promises without clarity, love without commitment, closeness that is never enough. They want you trapped in that gray zone so your heart lives in perpetual anticipation. And the fear of losing them is the longest anticipation of all. When they see you again, their greatest hope is that the gray zone still exists inside you. They want to see that you are still unsure of yourself, still unsure of what you deserve, still unsure whether anyone else could replace the role they once held. The truth is, they do not need you to come back. They only need you to not fully leave. If you still fear losing them, they feel they can return at any time, when they're bored, lonely, craving admiration, or when their new supply runs dry. Your fear is the key that opens every door they want to walk through. To them, seeing you confident, whole, and unshaken when facing them is a warning sign. If you no longer fear, they no longer have power. If you no longer cling to a vague future with them, they lose their anchor. If you are no longer afraid of losing them, they must face what they were never prepared for. You have chosen yourself instead of choosing them. Research by Dr. Susan Johnson on emotional attachment shows that a person who fears losing a connection tends to shrink, compromise easily, and take back someone who hurt them just to preserve a sense of safety. Narcissists understand this not through books but through experience, and they use it as a direct doorway into another person's heart. But what they never expect is this: the fear of losing them was never a part of who you are, it was only a product of the psychological environment they created. Once that environment disappears, the fear dissolves with it. 6. They hope you still see them as someone special. When they see you again, they will be watching to see whether you give them any kind of special attention. If you look at them longer than you would at a normal person, if you seem slightly unsettled or even just a bit overly polite, they will interpret all those tiny signals as one conclusion: I am still the exception in your world. This belief is not simple pride. It is a defensive structure of a fragile ego. According to the analysis of Heinz Kohut, the father of modern self-psychology, people with a narcissistic structure cannot maintain a stable sense of self-worth without external reflection. Kohut called this the need for a self-depth of They must feel idealized or seen as a central figure in someone else's inner world in order to preserve inner stability. So when they see you again, what they hope for is not just attention, but defining attention. They want proof that they are still the one person who can pull your focus or shift your emotional state. The narcissist hopes that in your mind, they are still an unanswered question. They want to believe you reserved for them a special kind of curiosity. Why did they do that? Why did it have to end like that? Was it my fault? This type of curiosity maintains their illusion that they still have psychological gravity. If you still see them as a mystery, they feel they still have power. This connects directly to a phenomenon studied by Baumeister and Vos, 2004, on egotism and cognitive salience. The narcissistic ego constantly exaggerates how much other people think about them. When someone who once was close no longer gives them special attention, their ego experiences a sense of weightlessness, what Jung describes as the collapse of the persona, when the mask they built no longer receives the feedback it needs to survive. Therefore, when they see you again, they watch closely. Do you still tense up slightly when you hear their name? Are you still cautious when answering their questions? Does your face still change when the past is mentioned? From their perspective, all of these are proof that they are still the special one in your mind, the person you cannot place on the same level as anyone else. But what they fear most is exactly what they pretend not to care about. They fear you looking at them with a normal gaze, no anger, no questions, no need for explanations, no expectations. That normalcy is their nightmare because it erases the special position they think they hold in your life. According to Jung, when someone's inner image falls from an archetypal position, carrying symbolic weight, down to an ordinary position, that person's psyche suffers greatly because they are no longer the central character in someone else's story. The narcissist does not want to become ordinary in your eyes. An ordinary person is easy to forget. An ordinary person has no way back in. An ordinary person no longer shapes the flow of your emotions. So when they see you again, their secret hope is, make me believe I am still the exception in your life. What they do not anticipate is this. When you grow, you no longer see them as a special story. You see them as an experience. Nothing more, nothing less. And that very ordinariness is the deepest cut for them. It doesn't weaken you, it shatters their illusion. 7. They hope you are still searching for meaning in what they did. When the narcissist sees you after the discard, they know their actions once threw you into a chaos of questions and emotions. And what they secretly hope for, more than anything else, is that you still haven't stopped asking, why did they do that? Not because they want you to understand them, and not because they want to explain, but because they want you to keep revolving around their orbit, even when they are no longer in your life. If you are still searching for meaning in them, it means that in your mind, they remain at the center of an unfinished story. This allows them to maintain the position of important character in your psyche, even after they've left. For them, power does not lie in whether they are physically present or not. It lies in whether you still orbit around their imprint. When they see you again, they are not really observing your smile or your tone of voice. They are reading the depth of your gaze. The gaze of someone who has understood is usually very still. The gaze of someone still searching for answers, wavers gently like water before the wind. That is the water they want to see. Because if you are still trying to decode their behavior, they feel they still hold the role of great mystery in your story. A mystery is what makes people stay. A mystery is what pulls people back. And they need you to remain exactly in that state, not understanding enough to let go, but not clear enough to cut the cord. In analytical psychology, Jung called this the projection tether, the invisible cord created when you have not yet withdrawn the expectations and illusions you projected onto another person. The narcissist hopes you have not yet pulled that cord back. They want to believe you are still piecing together fragments to understand them, as if they are a grand equation you must solve to the end. They know the more confused you are, the harder you'll search for meaning. And in that search, they live a second life inside you. A life in which they do not have to be present to still exert influence. They hope you will ask yourself, were they acting like that because they were hurt? Was I the one who triggered them? Is there something I still haven't seen? What if they really loved me and I didn't realize it? As long as you are still asking, they still exist. As long as you are still trying to find meaning, they still have power. What frightens them most is not the answer you may eventually find, but the moment you stop searching. A person who no longer needs an explanation is a person who has stepped out of the spiral. A person who has found meaning within themselves no longer needs meaning from anyone else. If, when you look back on them, you no longer ask why, no longer torment yourself, no longer analyze, but simply see the truth as clearly as a flat stone, then they feel as though their entire magic show has been ripped open in front of them. Because when you no longer seek meaning in them, you reclaim the full right to interpret your own life. They are no longer the question you must solve. They are merely a chapter you have finished reading. And for a narcissist, there is nothing more terrifying than becoming a paragraph no longer needed. When you understand what a narcissist secretly hopes for when they see you after the discard, you begin to see a very important truth. All of those hopes share one common root. They can only exist if you still place them at the center of your inner world. Every expectation they have, no matter how subtle, is based on the assumption that you still orbit around them, that you are still in pain, still guilty, still comparing, still searching for answers, still keeping some door half open. What they never say out loud is this: they do not come back to check on you. They come back to check on the version of themselves that lives inside you. And in that very moment, power shifts, because when you stand in front of them, no longer trembling, no longer afraid of losing them, no longer seeking meaning in what they did, when your gaze no longer wavers and your heart no longer shrinks, you don't just surprise them, you demolish the entire ego structure they built on your reactions. Jung once said, "We are strongest when we are no longer defined by someone else's image of us." Your growth, your calm, your separation from the shadow they once cast is exactly what forces them to face a truth they have always avoided. They no longer have the right to define your emotions. You don't need to beat them, don't need revenge, don't need to prove you're doing better. Your peace is already the answer, and that for them is the greatest defeat. Not because they lost you, but because they lost the version of you that kept their shadow alive. When you look at them with awakened eyes, you see clearly. Every hope they carry comes from their inner fear. Every expectation they seek is just an attempt to cling to an old illusion. And every bit of power they think they have disappears the moment you stop reacting according to the old script. You are no longer the one being read by them. You become the one who sees through them. And from that moment on, the story no longer revolves around what they hope for, but around what you choose to keep and what you decide to walk away from. No one escapes their own shadow by chasing another person. You escape by walking straight into your own light. And when you do that, they may look at you, remember you, hope for anything they like, but none of it matters anymore. Because in the end, what defines you is not how they treated you, but how you rose after they left. When you no longer orbit around them, they no longer have a story. When you return to yourself, they lose their power. And when you know what you truly deserve, they are no longer a test. They are simply a chapter that has passed.